Do they teach classical music in the hood now? Or do you just rap? The words cut through the air sharper than any knife. The room went quiet for a heartbeat, then erupted in laughter. Cold, mocking, superior. Every head at table 3 turned to look at her, the only black waitress in the room. Jasmine Carter stood frozen, her tray trembling in her hands, her heart pounding like a drumline. She had heard worse. But somehow, tonight, it stung deeper. They didn't laugh because it was funny. They laughed because they expected her to take it. Because to them, a young black woman in a hotel uniform had no business talking about Chopin or Tchaikovsky. The man behind the insult, Cliff Henderson, wasn't just any guest. He was a billionaire CEO, dressed in a custom Italian suit and Rolex thicker than Jasmine's rent. He snapped his fingers and smirked, as if dismissing her like some failed experiment. Or maybe you want to twerk for a tip. That's more your style, right? Another burst of laughter. Jasmine's face burned. But her eyes didn't lower. She didn't flinch. Instead, she looked past him, to the grand piano in the corner of the ballroom. Covered in linen. Forgotten. Like her. She didn't argue. She didn't curse or cry. She whispered quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. If I could just play. Just once. This wasn't just about music. It was about reclaiming something stolen. Respect. Identity. Her story. And tonight, under crystal chandeliers, in front of cameras and champagne glasses, her black story was about to begin. A story not of vengeance, but of power. Not of noise, but of notes. So if you're here for more than just drama, if you're here to witness a woman turn humiliation into harmony, stick around. This story doesn't ask for pity. It commands your attention. Stay with us. Because sometimes, one song is all it takes to silence a room. Long before Jasmine Carter wore a name tag and carried trays, she wore satin gloves and stood on concert stages. She was born in Detroit, in a neighborhood most maps forgot. But even as a child, Jasmine's hands moved like water over piano keys. Her father, Marcus Carter, used to say she was born with music in her blood. And he would know. Before he took a job fixing cars to support the family, he was a jazz pianist, never famous, but always brilliant. They didn't have much. A small 2-bedroom apartment over a corner store. A second-hand upright piano that leaned slightly to the left. But when Jasmine played, the floorboards seemed to straighten, the city noise outside faded, and the world listened. At 9 years old, she won a scholarship to the Detroit Youth Conservatory. At 11, she performed her first solo recital, Mozart, by memory. Critics whispered she was a prodigy. Teachers called her unstoppable. But life didn't care about talent. When Jasmine was 12, a stray bullet took her father on the way home from work. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, like so many black men in America. The music stopped that night. Not because Jasmine couldn't play, but because she couldn't feel. Her mother, Rochelle, tried to hold it all together. But grief does not share space with health. She developed complications with her heart. Hospital visits replaced piano lessons. Medical bills replaced sheet music. At 14, Jasmine dropped out of the conservatory. She took a job bussing tables at a local diner and never told her friends why. She stopped playing altogether. The piano at home collected dust until the landlord sold it for rent. She had one composition notebook left, filled with melodies she never played for anyone. She kept it hidden at the bottom of a shoebox, along with a photo of her father and a broken tuning fork. People looked at Jasmine and saw a pretty girl with a steady job and a tired smile. What they didn't see was a broken symphony waiting to be heard. They didn't see that once, she was someone else, someone powerful. Someone who could make a room fall silent with nothing but her fingertips. But forgotten pasts have a way of returning. And Jasmine's wasn't done with her yet. By 22, Jasmine Carter had mastered the art of invisibility. She moved through the marble halls of the Sovereign Hotel with practiced silence, balancing champagne flutes on silver trays and folding napkins with military precision. The uniform fit her well. tailored black pants, a crisp white shirt, hair pulled into a tight bun. She looked polished, professional. But inside, she was unraveling. The sovereign was luxury wrapped in entitlement. Celebrities dined beneath chandeliers imported from Venice. Senators slipped bribes under the guise of charity galas. Executives toasted deals that would cost hundreds of jobs but make them richer by morning. And Jasmine? She was the one who cleared their empty plates and smiled when they snapped their fingers. She was good at her job. Too good, maybe. Management trusted her to handle the difficult tables. The ones who complained if the wine wasn't chilled to the precise degree or if the bread was sliced too thick. They sent her to tables where they didn't want a rookie, but didn't want someone too white either. And so Jasmine stood there night after night, absorbing comments masked as jokes. "You're too pretty to be serving drinks. You got that southern heat in you, huh? Let me guess, you sing too, baby girl?" She'd nod, smile, walk away, pretend it didn't bother her, pretend she wasn't counting every step until her shift ended. What stung more than the words was the way no one stepped in. Not the manager who had complimented her resilience during training. Not the older servers who had told her to keep her head down. Not even the black busboy who avoided eye contact, afraid his silence might keep his job safe. Sometimes Jasmine would steal a moment in the staff locker room, close her eyes, and imagine herself on stage. She'd see her hands glide across ivory keys. She'd hear applause instead of orders. She'd feel pride instead of pressure. But the fantasy always faded when someone banged on the door, yelling for her to quit daydreaming. She had buried her past so deep, even she began to question if it had ever really happened. Maybe she had imagined being special. Maybe Detroit and Mozart and conservatory lights were just a dream from another life. A dream she wasn't allowed to have anymore. It was the kind of night that made headlines. The sovereign's grand ballroom was dressed in gold and velvet, glittering beneath a dozen crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved like shadows, weaving between tables set with $300 bottles of wine and custom-printed menus. The annual Harmony for Humanity Gala had arrived, an event where billionaires pretended to care and charities fought for a sliver of their guilt. Jasmine Carter had been assigned to the VIP section. That meant white gloves, not latex, polished heels, not sneakers. It also meant being ready for anything, especially when anything included the most powerful man in the room. Cliff Henderson arrived fashionably late, as always. The whispers started before the doors even opened. He was a household name, a tech mogul whose empire stretched from artificial intelligence to real estate to offshore accounts. He didn't just walk into rooms. He owned them. And tonight, he was drunk with power, and likely a little bourbon. He scanned the room with the cold precision of a predator, eyes landing on Jasmine like she was part of the decor. He smirked, then turned to the men beside him. "I see they're offering entertainment with the entrees now." The men laughed, too loudly, too eagerly. Jasmine felt her stomach turn, but she held her posture. She had learned long ago that humiliation rarely came with warning. It just arrived, uninvited, unapologetic. Cliff pointed toward the corner of the ballroom, where a grand piano stood neglected beneath a linen cover. "Now tell me, darling," he said loud enough for half the room to hear. "Do you know how to use one of those, or is your talent limited to tray balancing?" People chuckled. One woman gasped but didn't speak. Jasmine's eyes flicked to the piano. A Steinway. Black lacquer. Untouched. Disrespected. Just like her. She could have walked away. Could have smiled and swallowed the insult like so many others. But something cracked open inside her. Maybe it was the music still hiding in her bones. Maybe it was her father's voice whispering, "Play, Jazz. Always play." So she said, softly but clearly, "I used to." Cliff leaned back in his chair, amused. "Used to? What stopped you, baby girl? Not enough quarters for the jukebox." The laughter rose again. Jasmine didn't blink. "I stopped when the music stopped meaning something." Then, without asking permission, she stepped toward the piano. And everything began to change. A hush fell over the ballroom as Jasmine walked across the floor, each step echoing louder than the next. The linen cover draped over the Steinway slipped from her fingers as she pulled it back, revealing the piano beneath. Dusty, forgotten, but still magnificent. Its surface gleamed under the warm light, like it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for her. She didn't sit down. Not yet. She turned to the crowd. Her voice didn't shake. "Can I play for a piece of food?" The words hit the room like a cold gust of wind. Someone at table 5 choked on their wine. A man muttered, "Is she serious?" A woman snickered. Phones started to rise, recording, live streaming, catching every second of what they thought was about to be a train wreck. Cliff Henderson raised his glass, amused. "That's bold. I'll give you that." He leaned forward. "All right, sweetheart. You play. If it's even halfway decent, I'll order you the steak and lobster combo. How's that for motivation?" Laughter rippled across the room again, but this time, it was thinner. Some people looked uncomfortable now, unsure if they were witnessing a joke or a moment. Jasmine glanced at her manager, standing stiff near the back wall. His face was pale, but he didn't stop her. She turned back to the piano and finally sat down. The bench felt foreign and familiar all at once. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Her breath slowed. This wasn't just about hunger. Not anymore. This was about proving that dignity didn't wear tuxedos. That brilliance didn't always come wrapped in privilege. She whispered one last thing, only loud enough for herself. For every girl who was told she was just a server. Then she played the first note. Soft, clear, pure. The room didn't laugh this time. They listened. The first note hung in the air like a secret. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. But it was alive, aching and beautiful, delicate as a whisper in a cathedral. And in that moment, every fork, every phone, every breath seemed to stop. Jasmine's hands moved like she had never stopped playing. She chose Rachmaninoff, not because it was showy, but because it was honest. Deep, dark, demanding. A piece that didn't ask for approval, but dared the listener to feel. The keys responded to her like they remembered her touch, like they had missed her. Across the ballroom, people leaned forward in their seats. Wine glasses paused midair. Even Cliff Henderson lowered his drink, eyes narrowing not in amusement, but in disbelief. Jasmine's right hand danced across the high octaves, painting notes that shimmered like moonlight on water. Her left hand answered, grounding the melody with power and weight. It was a conversation between pain and strength, loss and defiance. And it was impossible to ignore. A woman near the back placed her hand over her mouth. Her husband glanced at her, then back at the stage. He had heard this piece before, but never like this. Never with this kind of soul. The ballroom that had moments ago been buzzing with ego and laughter was now church quiet. The servers stopped mid-step. The kitchen staff peeked through the side door. Even the manager, who had once begged Jasmine to not cause a scene, stood motionless, eyes locked on the girl he thought he knew. She played with everything she had. Not just skill but memory. Not just muscle but mourning. Each note reached into the corners of the room and pulled at something raw. People weren't just hearing music. They were remembering something they didn't know they had forgotten. A lost dream. A buried ache. A version of themselves they had pushed aside. When Jasmine reached the climax of the piece, she didn't flinch. She didn't apologize for her volume or her power. She let it echo, bold, unfiltered, undeniable. And when the final chord landed, heavy and clear, there was no applause. Not yet. Only stillness. Because in that moment, even the richest person in the room knew. They had just witnessed something priceless. The silence lingered long after the final note. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't hesitant. It was reverent, like the room itself needed a moment to catch its breath. Then, somewhere in the back, someone stood. A single pair of hands clapped, slow, deliberate, not for show, but for respect. And then another joined. And another. Until the ballroom erupted into a standing ovation. Chairs scraped backward. Crystal glasses trembled on linen-covered tables. Phones were forgotten. There was no filter to apply, no hashtag to trend. Just the sound of raw, unfiltered praise. Jasmine sat still for a moment, her hands resting gently on the keys. She didn't smile. Not yet. She wasn't playing for applause. She had played to survive. To remember who she was before the world tried to tell her otherwise. She finally looked up. What she saw didn't look like victory. It looked like awakening. The same people who had laughed, mocked her, dismissed her, filmed her for amusement, were now crying, clapping, shaking their heads in disbelief. The woman from table 5 pressed a napkin to her face. A teenage girl near the exit mouthed the words, "Thank you." And Cliff Henderson? He was gone. At some point during the performance, he had slipped out the side door, unnoticed, unimportant. The power in the room no longer belonged to him. It belonged to her. The MC of the event, stunned and blinking back tears, stepped up to the mic. I don't think words can follow that, he said. But if there's ever been a moment that embodied the spirit of harmony for humanity, you just witnessed it. Another wave of applause. Not forced. Not polite. But earned. Jasmine stood slowly, offered a slight nod, and stepped away from the piano. And as she walked off stage, no tray, no uniform, no shame, the people didn't see a waitress anymore. They saw a woman who reminded them that brilliance comes in every color. And sometimes, the most expensive ticket in the room is the one humility bought them. They asked for one more. Not with words. Not with chants or cheers. But with the way they stood. Silent, waiting, hoping. Jasmine paused at the edge of the stage. Her hands still tingled from the Rachmaninoff, but her heart was pulled somewhere deeper now. Somewhere older. Somewhere personal. She turned slowly and walked back toward the piano. This time, she didn't sit like a guest returning to a stranger's bench. She sat like it belonged to her. The MC leaned toward the mic, voice soft. Jasmine Carter. If you would be willing. She nodded once. But this time, she didn't choose a composer from the past. She chose herself. Jasmine placed her hands on the keys and began to play Sunday Mornings in Detroit, a piece she had written at 17, during the quiet hours between grief and survival. She had never performed it. Never dared. It was too close, too honest, too raw. But tonight, it felt right. The first few measures were soft, like church bells through fog, like the way sunlight slipped through her bedroom window before her father left for work. The melody carried memories. Her mother's humming in the kitchen. The clink of dishes. The sound of a record spinning 3 rooms away. And then it shifted. Minor chords pressed against major ones. The rhythm became uncertain. The melody stumbled, mourned, fought. It was the sound of change. Of losing what you love. Of waking up one day and realizing childhood is over. People in the audience didn't just listen. They felt. A woman clutched her husband's arm, thinking of her own daughter. A man stared at his phone, then quietly turned it over, screen down. Even the hotel staff stood still behind the velvet ropes. And as Jasmine played the final section, bright, resilient, full of hope, it felt like forgiveness. For everything. For the past. For the pain. For the girl who had once believed she'd never play again. The last chord rang out like a heartbeat finally at rest. And the room rose again. But this time, Jasmine didn't just hear applause. She heard belief. Belief in her voice. Belief that her story, her black story, deserved to be told not as a tragedy, but as a triumph. When the curtain finally fell, Jasmine thought it was over. She had played her heart out, told her truth through music, and walked off stage with a dignity no insult could shake. All she wanted now was a moment alone. Maybe a quiet meal. Maybe some air. But life had other plans. As she stepped through the back corridor, still catching her breath, A woman in a navy blue suit approached her. Tall, composed, hair pinned neatly. She didn't look like one of the hotel staff, or a donor, or a journalist. She extended her hand. "I'm Dr. Meredith Klein, Director of Admissions at Juilliard." Jasmine blinked, unsure if she heard that right. Dr. Klein smiled softly. "You probably don't know me, but I've known your name for years. I reviewed your scholarship file back when you were 14. You were recommended by 3 faculty members. They all said the same thing, that you were the kind of talent that doesn't come around twice." Jasmine's chest tightened. She hadn't heard anyone speak about her future in almost a decade. "I always wondered what happened to you," Dr. Klein continued. "Tonight, I found out." Jasmine couldn't speak. Her throat was dry. Her hands, still trembling, gripped the edge of the curtain. "I'd like to offer you a formal audition," Klein said. "Full consideration for admission. And if accepted, you'll be eligible for the Heritage Fellowship, a full-ride scholarship designed for students of color overcoming hardship." Jasmine felt like the floor shifted beneath her feet. This wasn't just a second chance. It was everything she thought she had lost. Just behind Dr. Klein, a man with silver hair stepped forward. "My name is Anthony Reyes. I'm the founder of the New Arts Collective. We sponsor young musicians, particularly those with stories that matter." He handed Jasmine a card. "I'd like to fund your journey. Piano, travel, living expenses. No strings. No contracts. Just one condition." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Promise me you'll keep playing," he said. "Because tonight, you reminded people what music is supposed to feel like." She didn't cry. Not yet. But something softened in her eyes. Something broke open. And just like that, the girl who once asked to play for a piece of food was being offered the world. 2 days later, Jasmine stood outside a brick building on the east side of Detroit. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long orange streaks across the frost-covered sidewalk. In her hand was a white paper bag, inside it a hot biscuit sandwich and a small carton of apple juice. She hadn't been here in years. The place was quiet, except for the sound of wheels rolling over linoleum. A woman in scrubs pushed a cart past the window. Jasmine could see her mother, Rochelle Carter, sitting near the back of the community room, facing a window. Her shoulders were smaller than Jasmine remembered. Her hair was thinner. But her presence, her quiet, familiar stillness, was the same. Jasmine hadn't called ahead. She couldn't. She didn't know what she'd say. But she walked in anyway. "Excuse me," she said softly to the nurse. "I'm here to see my mother." The nurse looked at her, then nodded with recognition. "She talks about you," the nurse said gently. "A lot. Even when the medicine fogs her memory, your name stays." Jasmine swallowed hard. She crossed the room slowly, her footsteps careful, like if she walked too fast, the moment might vanish. When she reached her mother's side, she paused. "Hi, Mama," she said. Rochelle turned, eyes cloudy but warm. She squinted for a moment, as if unsure if what she was seeing was real. Then she reached out a trembling hand. "Baby," she whispered. Jasmine nodded and knelt beside her. "Yeah, it's me." They didn't say much for a while. Jasmine laid her head on her mother's lap like she used to when she was little. Rochelle stroked her daughter's hair with weak fingers, humming a tune Jasmine hadn't heard in years. It was the lullaby she used to hum when Jasmine couldn't sleep. That afternoon, they sat together in a quiet room with peeling paint and a worn piano in the corner. Jasmine opened her backpack and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Her father's. The one with all his old compositions. She turned to a page near the back. It wasn't finished, just a few bars of melody and some handwritten words. "Play to heal." Jasmine looked up at her mother, who nodded slowly. And together, they began the work of remembering. Not just through stories, but through music. 6 months later, the lights of Carnegie Hall shimmered like a dream made real. Outside, snow drifted gently through the Manhattan air, dusting the shoulders of people waiting in line, dressed in black coats and evening gowns. Inside, every velvet seat was taken. The program cover read, "The New Voices Gala, featuring Jasmine Carter." Backstage, Jasmine adjusted the bodice of her floor-length satin dress. Deep red, strong, timeless. Her curls were pinned back, but not hidden. Tonight, she would not shrink. Tonight, she would take up space. This was not a comeback. This was a claiming. Dr. Meredith Klein had personally introduced her to the audience, calling Jasmine a once-in-a-generation storyteller who uses music, not words. The Heritage Fellowship had covered every cost. Anthony Reyes had made sure her mother had a front-row seat, with a custom wheelchair, a personal attendant, and a new pair of gloves to keep her fingers warm. And Cliff Henderson? He was there too, though not by invitation. He sat in the back row, sunglasses tucked into the collar of his coat, trying to blend in. But Jasmine saw him. And more importantly, she no longer needed to look away. The stage lights dimmed. The audience hushed. Jasmine walked onto the stage, heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She nodded to the conductor, then sat at the 9-foot concert grand piano, centered under a single spotlight. She didn't begin with applause. She began with silence. And then she played. Not Rachmaninoff this time. Not even her beloved Sunday mornings. She played Letter to My Father, the piece she had written the night before her Juilliard audition. A piece that was never meant for an audience, but for the memory of a man who taught her that music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. Her fingers danced with grief and gratitude. With every note, she told the story of who she had been and who she had become. The little girl from Detroit. The waitress in the ballroom. The woman on the stage. The final chord lingered like a prayer. And when she rose from the bench, the room did not simply clap. It stood. All of it. Even Cliff. But Jasmine didn't look for his face. She looked at her mother, beaming, crying, clapping with both hands. And she smiled. Because she had made it. That night, as the crowd slowly filtered out of Carnegie Hall, Jasmine stayed behind. The piano lid was down now. The lights had dimmed. The applause had faded. But something deeper remained, settled in the walls, hanging in the air like incense after a prayer. She walked back onto the stage. Not to perform, not to impress, but to sit in stillness. She placed her hand gently on the piano lid and closed her eyes. This wasn't about the music anymore. It was about the journey. And what a journey it had been. Jasmine Carter had once stood on a sidewalk with blistered feet and an empty stomach, asking if she could play for a piece of food. She had been laughed at, underestimated, insulted not just for being poor, but for being black. For being a woman. For daring to exist outside the boxes the world tried to keep her in. But music had always been her defiance. It had never asked where she came from. It never questioned her skin. It simply asked, "What do you feel?" And in that question, Jasmine found freedom. See, some people are born with privilege. Others are born with grit. And a rare few, like Jasmine, are born with both fire and melody in their bones. She had learned something most people never do. That talent is a gift, but courage is a choice. That dignity isn't given by society. It's claimed, every day, in silence or in song. That sometimes, your voice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to play. So if you've ever been counted out, laughed at, pushed aside, if someone told you your background defines your ceiling, let Jasmine's story remind you, ceilings are made to be broken. And music finds the cracks and pours through. Now, if this story moved you, if you felt something between the lines, something that stirred in your chest, I ask you for just one thing. Share it. Not for views. Not for clout. But because somewhere, someone is sitting in the back of a restaurant, or in a shelter, or in a small room with a silent piano, wondering if they still matter. And maybe your share is the sound they need to hear. Because a single note can change a room. But a story, a true black story, can change the world.